Well, I'm very happy to say we have another Renaissance man to speak to us tonight, because Dr. László Szabó is not only an ambassador, he's a medical doctor, a physician, a businessman who worked in the drug industry, and of course in the political life of Hungary. And prior to coming here, he served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He's been here as ambassador since last year. And I won't go into the rest of his background, which you received in the invitation. I'm just going to ask him to come to the podium as he speaks to us tonight on immigration and the preservation of European culture and Hungarian perspective. Ambassador.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm humbled to be here. And it's great to be here also. Your wine is actually almost as good as a Hungarian wine. So, thank you very much for this. My task is very, very difficult because I actually give always the same speech. We are talking about the great inventions of Hungarians, from the bubbly water to the transformator, the electric engine, the Rubik's Cube, holography, the carburetor, the Ford T model, the first computer in the world, Hollywood, which was founded mostly by Hungarians. The only exception is Warner Brothers, they were Czech. And so I can go on for days, basically. But we prepared this presentation especially for you. So this is the very first time I present these few slides. And I'm not using PowerPoint because I hear that there's some IT people in the room, right? Anyway, Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel was also designed by a Hungarian called Charles Simonyi, but PowerPoint was not. So that's why I'm using Prezi. Prezi is the name of the game. Prezi is one of the few Hungarian companies that made it global. They basically came here to the United States to do sales and marketing because we are not good at it, but the development stayed in Hungary. So that's the good news. That's a good business model. Everyone does what they are better at. So what I'm going to show you tonight is a few slides of what we believe is quite important to understand, and the rest of the world doesn't seem to understand. You probably know this joke that a gentleman wakes up early in the morning and he gets in his car, goes on the highway, turns on the radio, and the radio says, "Oh, watch out, there's a crazy man going against the traffic." And he says, "One? It's all of them." So sometimes we feel like this in Europe when it comes to migration, and that's why I'm actually very, very pleased. It's a pleasant surprise that you are here, Sebastian, because I didn't expect such an expert here. So whatever I tell you tonight, he knows better. Okay, so. But I hope I can translate you the thinking of the Hungarian government and thinking of the Hungarian people also. And maybe we can have a good discussion about this. I was told by Director Riley that I have approximately 1 hour, so I will try to kind of not abuse your patience. I can talk forever on this theme because in my previous job I was the deputy of the Foreign Minister of Hungary. Officially it's called the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The reason why I say that is I was the one who was responsible for the end trade part. My job was to establish trade diplomacy in Hungary and to make sure that all the government resources that has to do with export promotion and investment promotion are under one roof. So that was my job. So I'm not a politician and I'm not a diplomat, okay? So if you came to see a politician or a diplomat, go home, go home. What I brought here today is not a funny and it's not a jolly theme. And I would just like to show you the thought process, how the Hungarian people think. I can see a few Hungarian people here also who are disguised as American citizens, but don't be misled. 1.7 million people in the US believe that they are either Hungarians or they are of Hungarian origin. So watch out, watch your back. There might be a Hungarian around you who will invent something for you. Okay, this is a quote from our constitution. Our constitution says that we are a Christian country. It sounds like a simple thing, but not many countries have this in their constitutions. In Europe, we are the only one, actually. And this has actually raised quite a few eyebrows. How come you say that you are Christian? What about the Muslims? What about the Jews? What about everyone else? Well, Hungary is actually a very tolerant and very colorful country. We have lived with Muslims for more than 700 years together. We have lived with Jews also for a very, very long time. Sometimes I used to quarrel with my Israeli colleagues at Teva, because I was the CEO of Teva in Hungary, who came first, because we believe Israel was established by a Hungarian also. His name is Theodor Herzl. He was born in Budapest, by the way. So this is the Hungarian constitution, a sentence from the Hungarian constitution, two sentences actually. So we state that we are a Christian country, and we want to stay a Christian country. And that's a big deal these days. But this is not against anyone. This is about identifying ourselves and identifying our values and our culture. So that's what it is. It's not attacking anyone, and it's accepting everyone else. In Hungary, there's approximately, I believe, 26 recognized religions, and people every year, when they submit their taxes, they can decide which church to donate 1% of their tax. So even the Muslims are listed there, and many other religions are named. So it's not an exclusive statement. It's a statement of our identity overall. We believe that there's big problems in the world right now. Practically, if you look at the whole world globally, white Caucasians and Christians are a minority. That's very clear. But European Judeo-Christian culture and American Judeo-Christian culture is basically rooted in Europe, obviously. And now we believe that this identity is being attacked quite fiercely by not Islam, because I wouldn't like to generalize, but certain members of the Islam faith. Right now, and I have had arguments even with the ambassador of the European Union about this, in our view, and based on Open Doors, which is a religious association providing data about persecuted religions in the world, they believe that out of 5 people who are harassed or persecuted for their religion, 4 is Christian. 4 out of 5 are Christians. So this is something we have to take very seriously. Right now, 200 million people are persecuted because of their Christian identity. And only in 2016, in 1 year, 90,000 Christians were killed because of their religion, because they basically were brave to say that I'm a Christian. In the Middle East, 100 years ago, 1/3 of the population was Christian. 1/3 in the Middle East. Now it's 5 to 7%. That's what it is. And the majority of those people disappeared in the last 5 years, mainly due to the activities of ISIS. Only in Europe, and this is something new, the rate of terrorist attacks doubled in the last 3 years. So since this migration crisis started, the terrorist rate has doubled. And 98% of all those terrorist attacks were either performed by illegal migrants coming through the borders, the open borders, in the last 2 or 3 years, or first or second generation migrants whose families never integrated into the European and Christo-Judaic traditions or environment. We believe that it's not only us as human individuals, but also our culture is under challenge. Quite clearly, those or most of those individuals who come in are Muslims, that's very clear, and they don't want to integrate. So even even the Turks in Germany, where they actually contribute to society because many of them have very good works and they actually do benefit the German society, even they will not give up their religion, and they try to actually have more and more people to be turned into Muslims. But the second and third generation migrants are also, especially the ones who live in poverty or they have not integrated fully to society or don't speak the local language. There are second, third generation people who don't speak the language. They are the ones who actually revolt, and they go against the Christians and Jews in the streets of Paris, Brussels, Stockholm, and many other places. All of you have heard about Angela Merkel's Willkommenskultur, which is basically, you are welcome. If you say that you are a Syrian, you are welcome. I was there, and I'm sure Mr. Gorka was there, when this whole migration crisis really picked up. This migration has been going on for hundreds of years. So what changed in 2015 is the rate. Basically, the rate of illegal migration has not only doubled, but it went on an exponential curve. And in year 2015, Europe realized that there's a problem at our hand. But not whole Europe realized that. It was actually the southeastern border of Europe that realized that there's a problem. I was there in December 2014 in Brussels at the European Foreign Ministers meeting, when I had a test to stand up and say, guys, something is going on here. The year before, we had only 2,000 illegal migrants. This year, we have had almost 100,000. So something has to be done because this is becoming serious. And those people who come, 90% of them are young males. You can call it, with a malignant note, military-aged men, between 15 and 35. And they don't want to give a fingerprint because they say their religion prohibits that. They don't want to have a photo taken because their religion prohibits that. They only want to go to meet Angela Merkel and have the subsidies in Germany and in Sweden. That's all they want. And they don't have papers. They don't announce who they are. Actually, they lie to us most of the time. And they would like to just go through. And there's quite significant problems with that wish. It's not only migrants that come through the borders. Of course, there are asylum seekers and there are real refugees as well. So I'm not disregarding the fact that there are serious problems in Syria, and obviously in 2014, 15, 16, there was incredible massacre in Syria, and those people do need humanitarian help. So there's no question about it. The challenge comes when these people reach the first safe place. Based on the Geneva Convention, once you reach a safe place, after you have been persecuted due to your religion, your identity, your beliefs, then you are eligible for humanitarian help. Once you leave that safe place and you go through safe countries, you are a migrant. And if you go for the best place possible because you want high subsidies or you want a good job for yourself or you just simply want to live better, you become a financial migrant, an economic migrant. That's basically the Geneva Convention statement. So we have had actually problems from the very beginning of this migration crisis, that when in 2015, 400,000 people marched through Hungary. We didn't have a border control opportunity, even though we were obliged by the European Union to check everyone's identity. And if they don't have passports, they don't have papers, they have to ask for asylum. And there's a process, there's an order to protect, how to protect the European external borders. It was actually mandated by the European Union to us that whichever country is on the outside border of the Schengen zone, you have to protect the external borders of Europe. And the rules are basically included in the Schengen Treaty, and the Dublin regulations regulate those ones who ask for asylum. You register them, you practically create a document of their identity so that you can follow on later on what happens with those individuals. They didn't want to comply with that. So 400,000 people marched through Hungary, and we were trying to do statistics. 6% of those 400,000 people were from Syria. 6%. 70,000 people came from Afghanistan. Not the best friends of the US, I'm afraid. 70,000 people. And what we heard from Western Europe and what we heard even from America, from the United States, that guys, you have to be helping these people. You have to let them through. They don't want to stay in Hungary. Let them through. Let's let them go through to Germany or Sweden where they want to go. We said, okay, fine. Let's call Chancellor Merkel. I was there at this teleconference when Minister Lazar, who was head of the cabinet of the Prime Minister, called Angela Merkel, and we asked Angela Merkel, so what do we do, Madam Chancellor? Should we let them go through or do we keep the rules? She said, keep the rules. The Schengen Treaty and the Dublin regulations are in place. You keep the rules. That's your job. 5 minutes later, she goes out in the press and she says, welcome, welcome. If you are Syrian, welcome. Obviously, this was due to internal politics of Germany at that time, and she couldn't get out of that without losing face. So that took quite a long time for Germany to realize what was going on. I could show you photos, hundreds and thousands of photos, where people of Germany who have actually a feeling of guilt from back then, from the Second World War, they want to show the world that they are a welcoming people. And they want to make sure that anyone who is running for their lives or for their political beliefs, they have to have a place in the civilized world. So it's a big mistake and a big misunderstanding of what was going on. Once we started to set up the border control, once we tried to set up the filtering so that we can maintain the rules and the regulations of the European Union, it turned out that practically almost all people are lying who reach our borders. And we didn't know how it comes that everyone was born on January 1st, 1970, everyone was called Mohammed, and everyone came from Mosul. Everyone. Because they were told what to tell us. If they showed up in Belgrade in a certain bank, they said, hey, I just came with this boat from Turkey. Here I am, I have no papers, no identity. They were given a mobile phone and 5,000 euros. Not everyone, of course, but the ones who were informed in time and they followed someone else's kind of rules of engagement. So very scary situation. Once we set up those stricter border controls, we realized that on the Serbian border and then later on the Croatian border, every single day we had 3 tons of passports that were thrown away. And they were not Syrian passports. But what we heard from those people, 60-70% of them claimed that they are Syrians. So the numbers didn't add up, obviously. So what happened? The Hungarian government started to build a fence. It's not a nice thing to build a fence unless you have a really lousy neighbor. We started to build this fence, first 1 line, later on 2 lines, and we really wanted to make sure that we can keep the borders. We did not close down the borders ever, so anyone who came through the official border crossing stations could come through legally. What we tried to reach, that we closed down the border for those who want to march through the fields and want to swim through the rivers and who want to go through cornfields and wheat fields. Those are the ones we wanted to stop and make sure that they go through officially, legally, as we are mandated by the European Union, through the official border crossing stations. Of course, they didn't like it. So there were some very unfortunate situations emerging from that. So when you read the Washington Post or when you read many of the German or French or British daily papers, these were the type of pictures you were shown. And journalists in Germany, we know this from journalists, were told not to use the word migrant. They had to use the word refugee. The photographers, the reporters had to take photos of the few women and children who were trying to cross and not about the young men who were trying to break down barriers and just simply march through our countries. This particular picture, we have the story of this picture, was taken at a fence. So imagine there's 15 photographers in front of this lady. This is the fence, and the fence ends about here. So these are the type of things we were kind of trying to fight with. Also, many of you might remember this terrible photo where there's a policeman leaning down to a lady who is holding her child, and there's a gentleman, an Arab gentleman, who is reaching for them as well. And the subtitle of that picture was that the brutality of the Hungarian police is shown on this picture, where the policeman throws the lady on the rails with her poor baby. It turned out that this was just a frame from a short video that was taken. In that video, it's clearly seen that this Arab man throws the mother and the child on the rail, and the policeman is leaning down to help her up. Hungary won a trial against the Austrian paper that published that picture that went around the world. Have you heard about the result of that trial? And whenever a Hungarian official, a Hungarian government official wants to go to the Washington Post and say, guys, this is not true, can we tell our side of the story? They say, I'm sorry, no. For 9 years, a Hungarian politician could not give an interview to the Washington Post or the New York Times. Okay, so these were the pictures we saw. This was shown by Hungarian TV, and even though Hungary was criticized that we don't have a freedom of press, we actually do. We actually have a wonderful Hungarian journalist here with us from the Hungarian, how do you say, telegraph? Yeah, the Hungarian National Press Agency, Hungarian National Press Agency. So she knows exactly what I'm talking about, quite clearly. Were you ever told which words to use and which words not to use? That was done in Germany, not too long ago. So this is what we were facing with. As soon as we started building a fence, and we said, guys, you can come through, but here's the gate. And please don't ruin the gate. Knock on the door, and we will let you in, as the rules are telling us. Obviously, this love story started in 2015. And this lady, this is a real story. This lady is now 15 years old. She lives in Sweden, in Stockholm. And in Stockholm, there's no no-go zones officially. I was there in 2015. I was told that Hungarians are fascists. They are rebuilding the Iron Curtain. They don't know what they are doing, and they are completely not human. While in Stockholm, in certain districts of Stockholm, the ambulance could not go in to those districts without police escort. The metro, the subway, stopped after 6 p.m. because it was not safe for the drivers. In certain districts of the city where wealthier people live, they stopped the public transport to go there. They rather bought cars for the gardener and the maid so that nobody else will approach them in certain districts of Stockholm. This is how they live in Stockholm today. They let in 160,000 people in 2015. They decided that only 80% or 80,000 of them will get asylum in Stockholm, and they informed the other 80,000 to go home. Do you know where they are now? Because the Swedes don't. They disappeared. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán proposed some activities to the European Union because obviously the European Union had no idea what to do. Instead of managing the problem, they were trying to manage the symptoms. There's a joke, and I know it might be inappropriate, so I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings with this, but I have told this joke in Brussels, in Stockholm, in Munich, quite a few times. Imagine that there's a water leakage. So two men are standing in a room, and they say, hey, the water is dripping here, so let's do something. Let's find a pipe. Let's close the pipe because this water will ruin this room. And the other person says, no. We should decide how we will distribute this water in the other rooms. And this is what has been going on in the European Union for 3 years. 3 years. What we proposed is that why don't we go and close the pipe? Why don't we help those poor people who really run for their lives, who need humanitarian help in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan? Let's go there and let's spend our money there so that we, first of all, get rid of the war, we put things back in order, and we create a meaningful future for those people. Let's build schools, let's build hospitals, let's create jobs for those people so that they have a meaningful life, so they will not have to leave their country. Let's not import the problem with these people to Germany or Sweden. Now Sweden is planning how to increase taxes so that they can provide for those 80,000 people, officially, whom they want to maintain. Do you know how many people have jobs out of this 1.6 million who went to Germany? 5,000. 5,000. Okay. We did not only have to deal with the problem of illegal migration, but also we had to deal with politicians, with NGOs, and the EU establishment, which is a left liberal-leaning leadership of the European Union. It was not easy because we had really this very strange schizophrenic situation. Whenever I talked to those politicians officially, they were calling us fascists and inhuman. As soon as we left the room and had a glass of water together, they said, you know, I envy you for this, for what you say. You are doing the right thing. When I met with politicians in Stockholm, they said, yeah, it's unacceptable what you do. When I asked back, so how come that before the Hungarians built that fence, you are criticizing us? 2 years before us, you built a fence from Swedish steel with Ericsson technology on the Turkish-Bulgarian border. And that was financed by the European Union. So that was kosher. Our fence is not kosher. Can you explain this? Of course, red faces. As soon as I left that room and I met with businessmen from Stockholm, they said, can I ask for asylum in Hungary? Because life is unbearable here. And I know that my investment in Hungary is safe. So thank you what you're doing. We heard the same. All the engines of Audi cars are manufactured in Hungary. Many of the Mercedes cars are manufactured in Hungary. And what the German investment leader said, danke Ungarn, danke, thank you very much. So we have had this really schizophrenic situation since then. Lots of criticism and lots of praise. The praise was usually unofficial. A poll was conducted by a Hungarian think tank. You can say, I think it was Winston Churchill who said that I only believe in those statistics I faked myself. So this was done by Hungarians, of course, but even if you halve these numbers, I think they are quite meaningful. This says that it was Századbék, this is just for Sebastian. So all the nations of the European Union were surveyed, and 78% of EU citizens says that there is a problem with migration and the border control should be really repaired of the European Union. More than 80% of them think that there will be more terrorist attacks happening in Europe. Let's not forget, in the last 3 years, 300 people died due to terrorist attacks. Hungary is being criticized, even today, earlier today, by the State Department for being anti-Semitic. Can you imagine how Jew-friendly those people are who are now in Germany? All these 70,000 Afghans, or these, I don't know how many millions of Muslim people. They are not really Jew-friendly. In Hungary, the Jewish organizations measured 18 cases of anti-Semitic speech. And nobody talks about the lady who was killed, the Auschwitz survivor who was killed by her neighbor in Paris. Nobody talks about it. It was just one piece of news, and thank you very much. So people are being killed for being Christian and Jews in Europe, And we are spending time and energy and American taxpayers' money on criticizing Hungary for being anti-Semitic. Today at noon, I had lunch with the two leaders of the largest Hungarian Jewish association, and I talked to them about this. And they said, László, in Hungary there is no anti-Semitism, okay? There are a few anti-Semite people, yes, but since the Hungarian government has zero tolerance, and it's in the law, it's in the constitution that we have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, it's not there. It's just simply not there. So anyone who says that Hungary is an anti-Semitic country is a liar, or just simply didn't read the news of the last 20 years. So, and this is what we are dealing with. Fake news, and I'm not trying to bring quotes from President Trump, but the news are not fair, and the news are distorted. Maybe on both sides, I don't know, except for Fox News maybe, where you appear. By the way, 20th Century Fox was established by a Hungarian. William Fuchs, that was the name. Okay, so basically there's a growing concern, and it's not a surprise that Macron was elected in France out of nowhere. Nobody knew where he was. He rose basically as a non-partisan candidate. And in 3 months, he became the most popular politician of France. Or look at the recent elections in Poland, in Austria, in Italy. I could go on, Czech. People are not stupid. So you can tell nice things for them for a year or two maybe, but sooner or later they will realize that their life is changing, their culture is changing, and their religion is being stolen by others. In 2015, until September, every single day, 8,000 to 10,000 people marched through Hungary, and we had no idea who they were. When we tried to give them help, they didn't accept it. When we told them that there's hotspots where they can have accommodation, they can have food, they can have medical care, and the kids can have education, they said, not interested. We want to go to Germany. Once we built that fence, it's not a nice thing, but we did build it because otherwise we couldn't keep the rules and the regulations of the European Union. These 8,000 to 10,000 went down to 10 per day. And we actually captured them, even that 10 are captured, because we made sure that the legislation is following reality. Since 1956, no terrorist attack in Hungary happened. No women have been harassed by migrants in Hungary, and no pressure on our social system happened since then. Those who came to Hungary, they left because they did not get the subsidies you can get in Germany. In Germany, I had a story, this is about 3 weeks old story. Bigamy, to have multiple wives, is prohibited. They made an interview, the German television made an interview with a gentleman who has 2 wives. One of the wives was 13 when he married her. Underage marriage is also prohibited and legally persecuted in Germany otherwise. They have 6 kids altogether, so it's a nice, happy family. They receive 30,000 euros per month from the German government. So sooner or later they will have a problem. Instead, Hungary created the Hungary Helps program. I told you about managing the problem at the root cause. We are really trying to help where the help is needed, where the problem is. Instead of importing the problem, we would like to provide the help where it's needed. And let me share with you also a very nice example. I actually had a very deep discussion at early 2016 with one of the main foreign affairs counselor of Angela Merkel. He told me that it costs 20, 30 times more to provide the same help for a person in Germany or in Sweden than in Syria or Lebanon. Or you can turn it around, you can have 20, 30 times more people if you provide the help where the problem is, rather than bringing the problem to us. We are the first country, probably in the world, that established a state secretariat for persecuted Christians, for defending persecuted Christians. We are not talking about religions, we are talking about Christians, because somehow Christians are forgotten in the Middle East. The birthplace of Christianity is left alone. So unless someone helps them, and the local governments will not help them, we don't know what's going to happen. They will just simply disappear. I told you about these 5 to 7% Christians who are left. After 100 years, they basically went down to less than 1/4 of what they used to be. We actually created quite significant initiatives of help, and we are trying to work together with USAID to focus our efforts. We are not a big country. We are the size of Indiana with 10 million people, so we have limited resources. But from only $2.2 million, we rebuilt a whole village called Telkov near Mosul. More than 1,000 families were able to return after ISIS disappeared from the region. We also rebuilt 3 schools, and we rebuilt 1 hospital, and we made commitment in Syria to build another hospital from $5 million. Even little money can go a long way in those countries. We also found out that if you give money for these huge international aid organizations, not diminishing their influence on the world and the fantastic work what the UN or the Red Cross or the Red Crescent Moon is doing for people all around the world, but we just simply didn't see the effect of the money we pay for those organizations. So the idea was that we help directly those communities who are left behind in the Middle East, and we found out that the only cohesion for these communities is the church. Quite simply, it's the church. Of course, you have to trust them. You have to trust the priests and the heads of those churches in those countries. Without trust, nothing is working. But it turned out that if we give only 1 million euros or 2 million euros for those communities, this can go a long, long, long way. They can rebuild dozens of homes. They can reinitiate the lives of thousands in those small communities. We are all not only focusing on the Middle East, but also we have activities in Northern Africa as well. This is a school that was rebuilt by Hungarians, and these are all local kids. And as you can probably see, it's not only Christians, it's not only whites, we are open to everyone. So we rebuild those schools for the local communities, and we also rebuild the hospitals for the local communities. Now, obviously, people are not stupid, especially Hungarians, and we just had elections. I believe it was 1 month ago, and the current prime minister and the governing party was re-elected for the 3rd time with absolute majority. Actually, the first 2 times we lost this absolute majority during the course of the political cycle. We have 4-year cycles. But again, the trust is obvious, quite obvious. It's obviously not a coincidence, because the governing party was quite loud about their desire to defend the people of Hungary and defend the culture and the religion of Hungary, which was not easily accepted by many other countries. But this is the current case. So the new parliament just swore in yesterday, and the new cabinet will be announced probably in the next few days. Quite clear that the people understood that security is one of the major issues, and illegal migration has been probably the biggest problem since the Second World War in Europe. A few numbers about what happened in Hungary in the last 8 years, because this is in 2010, this government was first elected. It was a quite challenging period, because Hungary was just in a similar situation to Greece in 2010. Once we came out of the global economic crisis, we had incredibly high inflation, huge debt in the country, and basically what happened is that the government first came up with sectoral taxes. I was sitting on the other side of the table at that time. I was the head of the pharmaceutical company, and I didn't like that sectoral tax, trust me. It turned out we actually came out stronger from that challenge. What happened is that we started paying those extra taxes as the industry, and then we sat down with the negotiator table, and we agreed with the government that if we invest in the country in research and development, we will be able to deduct those from our taxes. it turned out that we came out stronger from that negotiation than we were before paying those special taxes. Also, Hungary raised the VAT, the value-added tax, the consumption tax, to the highest level in Europe, because the operation of the government had to be financed from somewhere, obviously. But in return, the tax on labor went down. Now we have the lowest personal income tax in Europe, 15%, and the lowest corporate tax, 9%. And if you invest in the country for the first 10 years, you get an 80% deduction even from that 9% corporate tax. So that's quite a big deal. So that's why, probably that's why, we have 1,700 US companies in Hungary who invested more than 18 billion US dollars in the last 8 years. They employ more than 100,000 people. Don't tell this to President Trump, please. And they enjoy a very good profit. And based on the AmCham survey, the American Chamber of Commerce in Hungary, they said that 80% of all those companies want to reinvest in the country. They want to continuously invest in this country. Why? Because the workforce is educated. You have to speak a language to graduate in Hungary. If you don't speak a second or third language, you don't graduate. You don't get a diploma. That's very straightforward. And obviously, we have these very low taxes for investment. And the all over average cost of labor is still very low in Hungary. We hope it's not going to stay forever this low, but this is still a competitive edge for us. Now, if you look at the numbers, unemployment rate went down from 12% to 3.8. The GDP growth was minus 8% in 2009. Right now, it's more than 4%. We actually outgrew the average of the European Union twofold and outgrew the average of the Eurozone threefold in the last 5 years. We also introduced some very strange new initiatives. If you make a promise to the government that you will deliver 3 kids in 10 years, you will get subsidies. $70,000, that goes a long way. In Hungary, you can buy a nice apartment downtown Budapest, or in the countryside, you can buy a house from that money. And only half of that has to be repaid with a very preferential rate, around 1% interest rate. So this is quite a nice initiative. Also, if you have 3 kids and you have an average salary, you practically pay no taxes. So even this very low 15% will disappear if you have an average salary and if you have 3 kids. That's nice. Of course, if you don't deliver your kids, then you have to repay some of that money. Now, what happened in the last 8 years, and we are talking about a very, very slow process. Obviously, the fertility rate doesn't just grow from one day to the next. The number of marriages went up by 20% in the last 8 years. The fertility rate went up 17%. I'm a part of that. I have 3 daughters. The number of divorces went down by 20%, and the number of abortions went down by 25%. I believe these are very strong numbers. Just to finish up my presentation, we believe that the fact that we have been a Christian country for more than 1,000 years, it matters. This is our identity. We have to build on our history. We don't live in the past, but if you don't have a past, you don't have nothing to build on. So that's why we believe that our identity, our culture, our religion is very important. And again, we embrace Muslims, we embrace Jews, we embrace many other religions, but you should not hurt the other. You should not convert the other. So whoever, the freedom of religion, we believe is very, very important, and we have to stick to that. And we believe we also need to provide help, coordinated, synchronized help to those who suffer for their religion. And those people are not sitting in this room or in Hungary. They are in the Middle East and in Africa. So if you can do anything for the US to join in to this initiative, it would be great. I know that Vice President Pence is on that route. And based on this speech he gave last November at the conference in defense of Christians, I think we are really alike in our initiative to go that way. Trust me, if the US joins in, very simple things, just build schools, hospitals, and meaningful lives for those people. They will not flood the US, they will not flood Europe, they will stay where they are because this is where they would like to live. But if they have to have a meaningful future. So thank you very much for your time.
Do you have any either proof or suspicion as to what it is that's behind this migration? Is it another Hungarian George Soros or something else?
Regarding George Soros, we have proof. We have proof. You have proof also. Google Google him. I'm serious. Check out what he's planning. When you put in migration and George Soros, his thoughts will come out. He believes that it would be healthy for Europe to take on 1 million migrants a year, and he believes this is the way to go forward. He doesn't specify how, and he doesn't specify why, but we also know that several so-called civil organizations are actually heavily financed by him, and many of those civil organizations can be identified. They are the ones who provide the leaflets for these people in Arabic language on what to say to the border guard, how to lie to officials of Europe, how to get more subsidies out of authorities in Germany or in Sweden. So those are happening, and we have proof of that.
And just to follow up, what can be done about it?
Use the microphone, please.
Well, and to follow up, what can be done about it?
Well, I didn't want to go on a too much political level here, because I told you I'm not really a politician. But the new parliament of Hungary that was just inaugurated yesterday, the very first law what they want to decide on is called Stop Soros.
Thank you very much for enlightening all of us. This is very interesting. What other countries of Europe support Hungary? You mentioned the animosity with some other countries, but which countries do support Hungary and want to work together?
This was very ambiguous in 2015. We were practically the only one for a few months to keep the rules and regulations. It was very strange that you are basically singled out and you become the black sheep of the family while you are the only one to keep the rules. So that's why I told you about this joke about the guy who goes against the traffic. So it really felt like that. We were embarrassed of keeping the rules and being legal. Quite quickly after that, the Visegrad 4 countries, the other three, joined in, and Czech, Slovak, and Poland, actually, they believe that we are right. Of course, they have borders along the Schengen zone, and they were concerned that if these people are coming from the east, we have to defend ourselves. I was there on September the 2nd, 2015, when my minister and the Prime Minister of Slovenia and the Foreign Minister of Slovenia were having a discussion about migration. And they said, "Oh, Hungary, why are you doing this whole fence thing? This is so inhuman. This is terrible what you do." And we said, "Okay, but imagine we are completing this fence in 2 weeks with the Croatian-Hungarian border. In 3 weeks, in Ljubljana, at the train station, you will have 50,000 people lined up. What will you do then?" Oh, that's an interesting challenge. When Hungary started to build a fence in the summer of 2015, Chancellor Faymann of Austria said that this reminds him of the darkest days of the Second World War. He basically called us fascists. 2 months later, when Chancellor Faymann started to build a fence, he called that gates with long wings. 40-mile long wings with barbed wire on the top. That's what they built, not fences. Now, if you look at the current Chancellor of Austria, 2 chancellors later, Sebastian Kurz, this name Sebastian comes back all the time, he believes exactly the same as the Hungarian government, that we have to keep order. We have to make sure that if we have migration, that has to be controlled. And any country should be able to decide who lives in that country. If I want more engineers, if I want more blue-collar workers, then I send 3 charter flights to Syria and say, "Okay, guys, who wants to work in a pawn shop? Who wants to work in a factory? Who wants to treat German children? Come here, learn the language, and I give you a job." But this is not happening. And as I just mentioned before, if you see when Italy was feeling sure that they just accept all those North African migrants from the Mediterranean Sea. They just send them off. They put them on buses, on trains. Off they go to Germany. Everything was fine. They were criticizing us. As soon as the Austrians and the Germans said, no, you cannot send here anyone. Have you registered those people? We will send them back because of the Dublin regulation to you, Italy. They suddenly started to support the Hungarian viewpoint. And they said, oh, there's serious problems. So Europe, help us. We have to stop this migration. So this is a gradual process. Of course, the more north you are in Europe, the less of a problem you have. The more south you are, it's there. If you look at the Moroccan-Spanish border, they have had a fence for, 20, 25 years or more, 6-meter tall barbed wire fence, and I think there's 2 or 3 layers, one after the other. This was actually supported by the European Union, and nobody has had a problem with that. And even the Moroccan government actually supports that fence because they don't want their people just to leave the country. They want to create a better life for Moroccans in Morocco. And that's what makes sense.
Mr. Ambassador, have you been in direct conversations with church leaders in this country to awaken them to the persecution of Christians and to engage them in helping the persecuted Christians?
We have, but we haven't. We were a very, very small organization. I have 24 people here in Washington, D.C., and another, 5 dozens all across the U.S. So we don't have the PR power. We meet on an individual level, and our Baptist organization has been helping in Texas when there was the flood, and in Florida, and we were trying to help refugees due to the natural disasters in the South last year. They are constantly in touch with local churches, obviously, and we also joined with the In Defense of Christians organization and initiative. We are organizing a conference with them in June. So I hope that there will be a widespread media coverage of that. We are too small and too poor to make an impact here. And for some reason, the Washington Post and the New York Times is not helping us. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you get a microphone?
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. 2 things. One, I can personally attest to the cultural openness of Hungary. I've been happily married to a Hungarian for 22 years. Because I have a Slovak
You're a smart
name.
person.
I'm a Slovak last name, and I'm half Italian, so the cultural
Wow,
openness is there.
fabulous.
My question for you is, it seems you've been very successful in addressing this as a nation. What advice would you give to our politicians to engage in the average voter in America for something very similar happening here in a different context, but a similar issue?
Well, thank you very much for your kind words. My wife just reminded me that in the previous answer I should have told you that we actually had an exhibition at our embassy building about the persecuted Christians in the Middle East. So we were talking about the damage what ISIS did with the Christian people and with the Christian sanctuaries in the Middle East. And that we originally wanted to show this exhibition for only 1 month. We actually took it over from the Hungarian National Gallery, and we were able to convince them to expand this exhibition with another 2 months. Unfortunately, they are gone now, but we are planning something similar in the autumn. So more than 1,000 people came to see that exhibition. But with some PR muscle, of course, we could do a bigger impact on that. And regarding your comment or question, I think we have won the battle, but not the war. Quite simply, the problem is still there. The root causes have not been managed. But I'm very hopeful that with the current initiative of the U.S. government, more and more common sense will come to the picture. Right now, both the European Union and the United Nations are trying to make migration a basic human right. We believe that this is absolutely stupid. Absolutely stupid. So just imagine, if I want to come to the US as the ambassador of Hungary, I had to fill in a 15-page document. I had to give my fingerprints, iris scan, photo. They even checked my x-ray, and even an anal examination was part of the test. Would you let in anyone from Sudan or Afghanistan, whoever wants to live in the US because that's a nicer place? It's absolutely stupid. So without control, without a mechanism to make this happen, to make sure that there is mutual benefit, this has to be done. Also, another terrible example. I actually took two high-ranking politicians to the Congressional Library about 6 months ago. Yeah, it was just before Halloween. And the director we met expressed his concerns that Hungary is handling migration in a very, very bad way, because everyone knows that migration made America great. And I told him, you might use the same word, but migration, going through cornfields and going for subsidies and not having to work and not integrating to society, this is the way we see migration. The way you see migration is basically a controlled, disciplined migration. When all these millions of people came from Europe in the 20s through Ellis Island, I don't know, you know what happened at Ellis Island. You were checked whether you were healthy. If you had diabetes, go back. If you had cancer, go back. If you are too short, go back. That's what happened. And we have records of that, very good records. So don't mix up the two things. We have to make sure that there's a clear understanding. Who's a refugee? They need help. Who's a migrant? Let us decide whether we want to have these people in our countries or not. So that's the approach we would like to spread. And I believe there's more and more people and more politicians who start to understand this, and I'm very hopeful that we will be able to find a common tone in the United Nations as well. If not, the United Nations will not have the support of the US anymore. I believe there's quite major risk. And I think this migration group or collective discussion that was happening in the EU was left behind by the US already. And it was actually also Hungary who was quite vocal about our opinion. Also, there's discussion between African and European countries and Middle Eastern and European countries as well on how they will manage the outflux of the people from their countries. We believe the aid should really be addressed to those countries who make a commitment that they will either take back those people once they are safe, or they will spend that aid of the West meaningfully and create meaningful life for those people. I think there's no other way. We are in minority. So we have to do something meaningful that will keep those people in their countries. And we invite only those nuclear physicists who we want, or biotechnologists we want. Have I answered your question?
I have 2 questions. Thank you very much. This was a fabulous talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
And very informative. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question about divorce and abortion have decreased. And I'm curious, are you keeping metrics about mass attendance and growth in Catholic parishes? And secondly, what about your national debt? You have a lot of subsidies. How is the national debt? I want to know about it.
Let me go backwards. Our national debt was 85% in 2010. Now it's 72%. So we were able to grow the economy and address the debt burden also. A quite significant chunk of our current deficit, which is actually significantly below 3%, is to repay the debt that was accumulated in the last 50 years. If there was no debt, our current budget would be in a surplus right now. When it comes to Catholic parishes, we have the numbers, but they are not happy numbers. Quite clearly, the most Catholic country in Europe now is Poland. We are really number 4 or number 5 on that ranking list, and the numbers don't look good. Young people don't necessarily go to church. We believe that the church has to rejuvenate itself and make it more relevant itself. That's why I love what's happening here in the US. Congregations really provide a social networking as well as kind of a social belonging to each other. We used to live in Indianapolis. That was the place to meet with your neighbors and your colleagues and friends outside of work. So I think these type of cohesive forces have to be still created in Hungary. Approximately 30% of the population is we call it Reformed or Reformatic church. About 65% of people are Catholics, and the rest, the biggest majority after that is the Jews and Muslims. We have like 3,000, and there are other churches, even new churches that grew in the meantime, and so there's a tension, but numbers are not growing right now. So I think we have to do something about that.
A little earlier in your talk, you referred to how our State Department has actually been funding some of the opposition to your government in Hungary. Are you disappointed that that's still going on under President Trump? And have you made an appeal to him, basically, to stop it?
I'm very glad about the new leadership of the State Department. It was really a breath of fresh air when Assistant Secretary Wes Mitchell got into his position in October. Wes Mitchell actually wrote his book on Unquiet Frontiers, the allies of the U.S. who are on the fringes of the U.S. influence, and what to do with the Russian threat, what to do with China. And he understands our area very well. And he believes, he actually used the words of Bismarck. He said, check out or watch out for Central Europe, because they are the ones between East and West, North and South. And their geopolitical importance cannot be underestimated. So I'm very glad that people like Wes Mitchell, like Brian Hook from the Strategic Department, and hopefully Secretary Pompeo will understand this. We still have refusals to higher level political meetings, even though Prime Minister Orban was the only politician who supported President Trump during the campaign. We have not had a meeting, an opportunity for a meeting with him yet. However, the invitation has happened, so I think it's just a matter of timing of when this can come together. What's more important, that Hungarian soldiers are fighting with American soldiers shoulder to shoulder in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We are defending the Baltic airspace. We have troops in Kosovo. We have heavy airlifting capacities provided to NATO on Hungarian soil, and we also have the commitment to raise our national spending for defense for 2% of the GDP. So this is a plan. This is something we will do very soon. This is very important. What we also would like to do is to reach more synergies with defense in the US. We believe it should not be only a transactional thing. Buy American weapons, buy German weapons. That's not good enough. I think we have to develop them together. Hungarians are very good at digital technologies. By the end of next year, all family households in Hungary will have high-speed internet access. We are building the most modern autonomous car testing track in the world right now. It will be ready also by the end of next year. We have more than 10,000 engineers working on autonomous cars. So I think if we develop defense together, also drone technologies, drone deterrence technologies, weapons, we have a lot of knowledge, not only in Hungary, in Czech, in Slovak, in Poland. I think if we build on each other, if we synergize, we will be much stronger together. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just very impressed by what you showed, particularly the rise in marriage and the lessening in the abortion rate as a Greek Orthodox Christian, and being fully aware of how so many Western European countries have reached significant problems with maintaining their own population.
Absolutely.
And considering that many of these Muslim families come over with multiple wives, young wives, it's just a question of time. It's very concerning, and that's not meant as an anti-statement, but just a concern over the disappearance of Western Europe. I'm curious, I read constantly over these situations, these horrors in Sweden, these, I think, something like 65 no-go zones, the grooming of the girls that was going on in England, that, of course, was never discussed in the Post, the Times, what have you. So many Europeans still seem to vote these open borders, people back into power. We seem to see a bit of a switch now. I understand in Austria also there's been more of a pro-Austrian closed borders government that has moved in, and having lived in Vienna for many years, I'd love to see, is there some collaboration going on between Austria and Hungary to sort of strengthen their borders? Also, I wonder, in Greece, you mentioned that as an area that's being quite, and I'm very aware of that, actually. And I discuss that with Greeks when I'm there, like, why do you keep electing these people who are destroying your country? So I'm wondering if you will see, do you feel that in the future, are you optimistic that more and more parties will be elected, politicians who indeed believe in saving Europe?
Well, I'm very curious what will happen next year. The European parliamentary elections are happening in fall 2019. Yes, 2019. So I'm pretty sure there will be a landslide. This migration problem will not go away. Quite clearly, the current leadership of the European Union is left liberal. I don't know if you heard, but last week, President Juncker went to celebrate the new statue of Karl Marx. Karl Marx. Completely disregarding that 100 million people died because of communism. And he's happily hugging George Soros because they are a good personal friend. And if you read the George Soros statement about what should be done in migration, you can read it in the new proposals of the European Union. That's a 3-year-old document. The European Union proposal is 2 months old. So I think people are not stupid, and I hope that people with values like yourself will sooner or later realize what's going on. Again, with Sweden, that's my most prime example. So this hypocrisy shows people understand. If you close your door and if you are with your friends, they think the same as Hungarians. Once they go out to public, they don't use certain words, they don't talk about certain things. It's terrible, really terrible. And living in a lie in your public life, that cannot be maintained forever. So I'm very hopeful and quite optimistic about this. What we should be spending time on is how to create social housing in Syria, in Lebanon, in Sudan, in Nigeria, how to create a whole home for a family for $1,000, how to provide safe drinking water for those people, how to sort out sewage water issues, how to provide food for all these people in Africa. That's a big deal, and that's what we should be spending our time, rather than criticizing each other on rule of law. Nobody knows what the rule of law is, okay? Nobody. And Poland and Hungary is now criticized for the lack of rule of law. And when we ask, okay, so what do you mean? If the European Union finds us okay, how come certain politicians in the US, they don't think that's okay? So there's so much hypocrisy and non-factual allegations, and we are spending time and energy and money on this. If you attack, we will defend ourselves, rather than focusing on the real problems of real people. Sorry, I'm being too philosophical.
One question is leading to this. So how is Hungary contributing to solving the root cause? You mentioned that, this first safe place that these, refugees go to is where they need to stay. And in the case of Syria, it's either Jordan or Turkey.
Or Lebanon. Or Lebanon.
Or Lebanon. Right. So how is Hungary contributing to keep them there? That way they don't, go to Europe.
Actually, we have found one level deeper opportunity for ourselves. The big organizations like the UN and the Red Cross are able to help those people in the big hotspots. Once they leave the hotspots, they lose their right to be helped. And one particular issue, what I haven't talked about, is that in those refugee camps, the Christians are harassed by the Muslim refugees, because 95% of them are Muslims and they don't want the Christians around. So in most cases, we have seen many families who actually leave the camps and they go to the church or they go to uninhabited places and they try to make a living there, but they lost their rights for food and shelter from then on. That's why we believe helping the churches directly is the best way to do. I'm not diminishing the fantastic work what these international organizations are doing, because they do a lot. The European Union as a whole have created a fund to help Turkey because they have more than 3 million refugees in their camps. And we are also directly helping Jordan and Syria and Lebanon as well. But we are a small country. We are just a tiny bit, a tiny drop in the ocean. The more countries join in, the better, obviously. But just simply providing help is not enough. We have to be able to make them work. We have to be able to convince them to contribute and rebuild their own country.
Hi, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you here.
Yes, and I just wanted to follow up on a question before about the State Department. Could you give us the status of that funding grant that they have out there for $700,000 of U.S. tax dollars to pay for so-called independent media in Hungary because they don't like the media there? As you know, my colleague and I from the American Hungarian Federation met with representatives of the State Department, and they tried to defend it somehow, but I just don't know what the status is. And number two, with respect to Sweden, my daughter married a Swede. We visited in Sweden a few years ago. They're in a very nice upscale neighborhood, but I talked to a few residents there about the Muslim and the culture. This is an anecdote, but they told me that the Muslim families, they do not want to have their children learn about Christianity and Judaism in the school where the school teaches religion just as a subject matter. They will not let them be exposed to those other two major religions. So, but Sweden is now starting to change. I would like to let you know that they're now realizing they let too many in.
Well, regarding this grant that was designed to improve the independence of Hungarian press, has created quite a lot of waves in Hungary, because we didn't believe that we have to be taught about democracy and freedom of press. I had to explain quite a few people at the State Department and in other places in the US government that, you will love this, Joseph Pulitzer was a Hungarian. He founded the Pulitzer Prize in 1917, 100 years ago. And so we know what independent journalism is and what modern journalism is. Now, when it comes to the freedom of press, I also shared the news that if anyone on the other side of the table would have spent 2 minutes on checking out where the largest internet-based news agency sits, pro-government or against government, who owns and what type of news you can read or you can hear on the largest commercial TV in Hungary. 80% of the people watch that TV. Who has the largest coverage, hard copy media in their hands, pro or against government? It's opposition. And nobody has been sent to jail because of their opinion in Hungary. I even was so nasty to say that Hungary is not the country where 31 journalists are in jail for not revealing their sources. But I will not finger point about countries where this is happening. So all I ask from our esteemed colleagues on the other side of the table is to be fair and objective. If they believe there's something is wrong, tell me the one journalist's name who could not reveal his opinion, or who did not get a page in any paper he wants to go to. There's none, because there is freedom of press in Hungary. That's simple.
Ambassador, if I may take the privilege of the last question. In the United States, the perhaps most vocal critics of the current administration's refugee and immigration policy are Christian leaders, and particularly the Catholic Church. What's the situation in Hungary regarding that? Are the Christian leaders there also criticizing the Hungarian administration's refugee policy?
Well, I would go back to my previous comment about definitions. So when it comes to migration versus refugees, there's a strict definition. And I believe this is what the church should be thinking about is also. We believe that as a Christian, you need to help the individual who needs help. The individual who needs help. I don't think we have a mandate to help a political or an economic wave of problems. And this is where I believe most or many priests of the Catholic Church are divided. I have talked to priests on both sides. The ones who believe the same thing as the Pope says, and some others who are kind of more leaning towards the Hungarian perspective. I'm not saying that the Pope and Hungary doesn't agree. We all agree that people in need need to be helped. But it's a misconception that those hundreds of well, I should say tens of millions of people who are charging against Europe, those are not people in humanitarian help. If they are in a boat about to drown, of course they are individuals who need help. There's no question about that. If someone is running for their lives because there are 5 people with guns between them, or there are ISIS soldiers with torches who want to burn them, they need help. If someone wants to live in Germany because the subsidies are high there, they don't need help. So, and as soon as this distinction is basically clear for everyone, I believe we are exactly on the same page.
Ambassador, thank you very much.